She thought she owned the neighborhood. An entitled voice, a furious glare, and a single act that crossed every line of human decency. In one reckless moment, she turned her prejudice into something ugly, something unforgettable. But what she didn't realize was that the man she tried to humiliate wasn't powerless. He was about to step into a role that would change everything. This isn't just a story about arrogance. It's a story about justice, and what happens when hate collides with truth. The neighborhood had always been quiet, the kind of place where people prided themselves on manicured lawns and neatly painted fences. For Marcus, it was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of hard work, saving every spare dollar, he finally moved into the community he had once only driven past. The house wasn't just walls and windows, it was proof of perseverance, a symbol of everything he'd earned through grit and patience. Most mornings, Marcus jogged down the curved streets, waving politely at neighbors who offered tight, cautious smiles. He noticed how some avoided eye contact, their faces stiff, their voices clipped when they did speak. Still, he pushed past it, determined not to let small gestures of coldness taint his dream of belonging. In his mind, respect would come with time. But the neighborhood had its gatekeepers. The HOA wasn't just a board, it was a kingdom ruled by whispers of control and entitlement. And within that kingdom, one voice rose above the rest. A woman whose sharp eyes never seemed to miss a thing, whose presence carried an edge that unsettled anyone daring to cross her. Marcus had seen her before, patrolling the sidewalks as if they belonged to her. Issuing warnings about trash cans placed an inch too far from the curb. He brushed it off after all, he had bigger goals ahead. What he didn't know was that her gaze was fixed far more on him than on crooked fences or overgrown hedges. And soon, her anger would erupt in a way that exposed just how unwelcome she believed he truly was. At first, the warning signs seemed harmless enough, tiny notices stuck to his mailbox. Stern reminders about grass length or paint color. Marcus read them and shrugged. Every homeowner got reminders, right? But soon the pattern became impossible to ignore. Other yards overflowed with weeds, but only his earned citations. Other houses had faded shutters, but only his mailbox received letters marked urgent compliance. He tried to reason with himself, telling his inner voice not to turn suspicion into paranoia. But the pattern wasn't paranoia, was targeted, systematic, and relentless. And the woman behind it, the one whose tight smile looked more like a smirk, seemed to be everywhere at HOA meetings. She wielded authority like a weapon. She questioned Marcus's parking habits, criticized the color of his curtains, and even mocked the small garden he'd planted out front. Neighbors noticed, some lowering their eyes in awkward silence, others whispering agreement when they thought no one could hear. For Marcus, each meeting became less about community and more about survival, sitting through public scoldings that felt drenched in something deeper than rule enforcement. One afternoon, the hostility burst into the open. Marcus was unloading groceries when she appeared, arms crossed, voice sharp with derision. She accused him of lowering the standards of the neighborhood. Her tone laced with entitlement and contempt. He stayed calm, refusing to fuel the fire, but the damage was done. Whispers fanned out across the block like sparks in the wind. If her goal was to isolate him, it was working. Still, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity, not out of naivety but out of strength. Behind the scenes, something bigger was brewing. Months earlier, frustration had been growing in the community. Many residents were fed up with the heavy-handed rules and the fear of petty fines. Elections for HOA leadership, long considered a formality, were approaching, and several neighbors quietly encouraged Marcus to run. He hadn't announced it yet, but word had started circulating. And when that whisper reached her ears, her hostility shifted into something else: open rage. To her, the idea of him, this man she dismissed and denied leading the board, was unthinkable. The next encounter wasn't just cold words or stares. It was unmistakably hateful. As Marcus walked toward his front door, she blocked his path, her voice rising with venom. His refusal to cower infuriated her more. And then, in one shocking, irreversible moment, she spit at him. The world seemed to freeze, the brazen act hanging in the air, raw and degrading. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some gasping, others retreating in silence, unwilling to intervene. Marcus stood still, chest tight, the sting of humiliation burning deeper than anything she could have said. But inside, behind the stillness, something hardened. Because soon, the balance of power wasn't just going to shift, it was going to flip entirely. The day of the election meeting arrived, and the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Folding chairs scraped the floor, neighbors clustered in their usual cliques, their whispers buzzing like static. And there she was, arms folded, chin raised, confident that her grip on the neighborhood was unshakable. Marcus walked in quietly, carrying the weight of every insult, every petty notice, and that humiliating moment when her hatred had crossed a line too raw to ignore. His presence alone drew stares. Some were curious, others uncomfortable, and a few, very few, were quietly hopeful. The ballots were counted in silence, the tension mounting with every tick of the clock. For her, it was supposed to be routine, another easy victory. She smirked as papers shuffled and totals were tallied. But then the numbers were read aloud. Marcus, the majority vote, the new president of the HOA. The shift in the room was instant and electrica. Collective breath of disbelief, sucking the air out of the space. Faces turned, some in shock, others in relief. The very man she had singled out, diminished, tried to strip of dignity, was now elevated above her. In that moment, her mask cracked. Gone was the smug entitlement. Her face burned with something closer to panic, her eyes darting as she searched for control that no longer existed. But it wasn't just her defeat. It was Marcus's transformation. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel in her collapse. He stood firm, calm, steady. This was bigger than a title, bigger than revenge. This was about reclaiming dignity stolen in broad daylight, and showing every neighbor what true leadership looked like. And as silence swept the room, eyes locked on him, everyone realized the power dynamic had shifted forever. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to change. Slowly, almost cautiously, people who had once stayed silent started approaching Marcus with nods of respect. Small words of gratitude, even quiet apologies for not speaking up sooner. As HOA president, he didn't wield power with bitterness, but with balance, listening more than he spoke, making decisions that promoted fairness rather than fear. For Marcus, leadership wasn't about settling scores. It was about proving that dignity, resilience, and integrity could thrive even in the face of open hate. He had stared down humiliation that could have broken him, endured a public display meant to strip him of worth, and instead transformed it into the foundation of his strength. But the deeper truth lingered. His victory highlighted an uncomfortable reality. The ugliness of prejudice was not confined to late-night viral videos or faraway headlines. It lived in safe-looking neighborhoods, behind white picket fences, in the daily interactions so many would rather ignore. That moment on the sidewalk, the spit, the contempt, the attempt to degrade, was more than a single act of cruelty. It was a mirror reflecting how racism continues to seep through ordinary spaces, often unchecked, until someone dares to push back. Marcus's story isn't just about one man winning an election. It's about what happens when a community is forced to reconsider who truly deserves authority, and about the quiet power of endurance in the face of hate. And so, the question remains, how many more Marcus stories will it take? How many moments of humiliation turn to resilience before silence finally shatters, and before justice is not the exception, but the rule? Because when arrogance spits, humanity must rise. And sometimes, rising means standing taller than those who tried to keep you down.